So, you've been diving deep into crime data, right? You sent over some pretty intense reports from New York City.
Yeah, it's been heavy stuff.
Shootings, stabbings, it's a lot. And the Fox 5 New York report, that Crime in the City episode, really brought it home. August 2nd, 2024. It's like, wow.
Yeah, August 2nd. It's one thing to read the headlines, but those visuals,
And the range of incidents, too. We're not just talking about one type of crime here, the Upper East Side murder-suicide, a toddler witnessing that. It's just
awful and senseless.
And then that string of shootings in Brooklyn, just like boom, 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 all in one night.
It feels so random, like anyone, anywhere.
Exactly. Even a celebration on Randall's Island, it's supposed to be a good time, and it still gets hit with violence.
Creates this feeling that nowhere is safe.
And then you've got that MTA worker slashed on the F train, just doing their job.
It's like even those in uniform, those who are supposed to keep us safe, they're vulnerable too.
Exactly. And it's easy to get caught up in the statistics, but that murder in Chinatown, the report actually showed the victim's family.
Oh man, that's tough to see.
Just raw grief. It reminds you that behind every headline, there's a whole story of loss and trauma.
And it's not just the immediate victims, right? It's the families, the communities, everyone feels the ripple effect.
Absolutely. And you sent over that ENCA video, Crime in SA, Impact of Violence on Children. And it really struck me how even if a child isn't directly involved in a violent incident, just living with that constant fear, that anxiety, it takes a toll.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine being a kid and that's your normal.
Right. Like, how do you just play in the park when there's this underlying fear?
It's like their brains are always on high alert. Psychologist Nikki Dawson, in the video, she talks about this.
Oh, right. I remember that.
She says it's like being stuck in fight or flight mode constantly.
And when your brain's in that state all the time, it's got to have some kind of impact, right?
Yeah, huge impact. And that's what we really need to unpack here. The psychological effects on these kids.
And it's not just like a little bit of stress, right? I mean, that analysis you sent over, the impact of crime on children's development and solutions, that talked about some pretty long-term stuff.
Yeah, it's not just about being a little scared. This is serious stuff. We're talking about PTSD, anxiety disorders, even depression. It's all connected.
And it can actually, change the trajectory of their lives.
Exactly. They're more likely to struggle in school, have trouble forming relationships, even engage in risky behaviors later on. It's like their environment, this chronic stress, it kind of gets hardwired into their brains.
So it's not just that they see a few scary things, it's that it actually changes how their brains develop.
That's exactly it. And we really need to remember this. This isn't about kids being bad or making bad choices. Their environment, that constant stress, it physically changes how their brains work. Like, there are actual studies, and they've measured differences in the brain structure of kids exposed to high levels of violence. It's all in that analysis you sent.
Wow. That's really heavy. But it's also like a call to action, right? We know it's happening, so we have to do something. And you mentioned that psychologist from South Africa, Nikki Dawson. She was talking about early intervention, right? What did she mean by that?
So early intervention, it's like the sooner you address the trauma, the better chance you have of preventing those long-term consequences. And one of the ways to do that is called trauma-informed care.
Okay, so walk me through that. What does that actually look like, trauma-informed care?
Well, it starts with this kind of fundamental shift, right? Instead of saying, what's wrong with this kid, you ask, what happened to this kid? You're not just trying to fix a behavior, you're addressing the root cause, the trauma.
So it's less about punishment, more about understanding and healing.
Exactly. You're creating this safe space where the kid feels seen, heard. And a big part of that is therapy.
Okay, but therapy, I mean, that can be, there are a lot of different kinds. So for kids who've been through trauma, what are we talking about?
There are a few approaches that work well. One is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Basically, it helps kids understand and then change those negative thoughts and beliefs that can come from trauma.
So they can manage their anxiety, their reactions, all that.
Exactly. Give them tools to deal with it.
What about younger kids, though? Like, how do you do therapy if they can't even really explain what they're feeling?
Yeah, good point. For younger kids, play therapy can be really effective. It allows them to process those experiences, but through play, so it's safe, it's non-threatening.
That makes sense. Kids communicate through play, so it's a way for them to work through it naturally. But therapy is one thing, but it seems like we need to do more, right? It's going to be addressed on different levels. What about building resilience? Is that something you can even teach?
Oh, absolutely. Resilience is basically the ability to bounce back from tough situations, from adversity, And the good news is it's definitely something that can be learned and strengthened over time.
Okay, so how do we teach that? Especially with something as intense as this, like constantly being exposed to violence. Okay, so how do we teach that, especially with something as intense as this, like constantly being exposed to violence?
It's about giving them tools, right? Coping mechanisms. It's about giving them a sense of agency, like they have some control. Remember Nikki Dawson was talking about calming the nervous system.
Yeah, trying to get out of that fight or flight mode.
Right. Things like mindfulness, yoga, even simple breathing exercises. These can be surprisingly powerful.
So it's like a toolkit in the moment. When the fear starts to take over, they have something they can do.
Exactly. Those techniques, they actually help regulate those stress hormones, those fight or flight responses. And that's huge. But, when you pair that with a supportive environment, that's where things really start to change.
So it's not just about individual coping skills, it's about the community too.
100%. Steel homes are crucial, of course. But it's also about safe and supportive schools, after-school programs, mentors, people who get it, parent workshops, where caregivers can learn how to support their kids emotionally. It really does take a village.
It's about creating these safe spaces, these pockets of peace where they can actually just breathe,
Yeah.
learn and grow.
Exactly. And that's actually why I thought that thing with Congressman Richie Torres was so interesting, his proposed Bodega Act.
Oh, right. From those news reports about bodegas being like targets of crime, but also these safe havens.
Yeah. Those shop owners, they're often like the eyes and ears of the neighborhood.
Right, looking out for everyone.
Exactly. So Torres, his bill, it would give those businesses, those community hubs, funding for security measures, like panic buttons, better lighting, things like that.
So it's small, but it's a step. It's acknowledging that these businesses, they play a role too in creating that sense of safety, that community feeling.
Right. It's about investing in solutions, things that make a real difference in these kids' lives and their families. And I think when you start to see that, it's like, wow, there's a lot we can actually do.
It's about awareness, right? Once you see the problem, you start to see the solutions everywhere.
Exactly. 100%.
Well, this has been eye-opening, to say the least. We've covered a lot. I mean, we started with those news reports, the reality of crime in New York City, and then the science of childhood trauma, the power of resilience. It's a lot to process.
Terrific stuff.
But knowledge is power, as they say. So hopefully this is a starting point.
It is. I think that's the message here. It's easy to get overwhelmed by this stuff, like what can one person do? But we all have a role to play, every single one of us. If we want to create a world where kids can grow up feeling safe, supported,
So to everyone listening, think about that. What will your role be? How can you be a part of that change? We don't have all the answers, but even small things, awareness, compassion, action, it all makes a difference.